Hello everyone, and welcome to Eternalism in a Nutshell. My name is David, and the title of this episode is If Only I Had Known Then, in 2004, What I Know Now, in 2023, Part 2. This is Episode 2. Now, to set the stage for where I want to go in Part 2 of this series, let's begin with a quick review of Part 1. Recall that I said in Part 1 that had I known in 2004 what I now know in 2023, that I would have approached this course in Eternalism quite differently, meaning I would have not spent so much time on the theoretical side of Eternalism, but would have incorporated far more of its practical side. For Eternalism too has a praxis, and in these latter days it's called the Restored Gospel of Jesus Christ and the Building of Zion, all of which is, of course, in preparation for the second coming of Christ. Now, I will have a great deal to say about this praxis in coming episodes, but for now, let's return to our review of Part 1. In Part 1, I pictured the dire state of Western civilization in these two images and commented that in 2004 I was quite aware of the enormous and numerous cracks in the support walls of Western civilization, the largest and most troublesome of which went by the name of postmodernism, a radically skeptical philosophy which undermined the very confidence of Western society by convincing the entire Western world that all truth was subjective, all values relative, and all ideals meaningless. Now, no house can stand for very long with this sort of structural damage to its foundational, intellectual, moral, and cultural support walls. And so, in 2004, I knew we were in serious trouble. But what I didn't know at the time was just how quickly this postmodernism would morph into cultural Marxism, or how quickly these cultural Marxists would show up on the scene as woke activists, using cultural grievances as sledgehammers, and all within the theoretical framework of Marx's social conflict theory, and under the spell of a praxis whose stated goal is to bring the entire house down upon itself. Now again, in 2004, I was aware that Karl Marx was the father of the social conflict theory, and that this social conflict theory was a nasty way of resolving social issues, ultimately leading to the deaths of millions upon millions of people in the Soviet Union alone, and all under the name of class Marxism, wherein one class of people, the propertied and middle to upper class, called the bourgeoisie, were pitted against the other class, the non-propertied laborers, and lower class, called the proletariat or working class. I was also aware that Karl Marx, unlike Lenin and Stalin, was a theorist who worked to develop a theoretical framework to operate from, without his ever engaging in the praxis or informed action required to apply this theory in the real world of power politics. Nonetheless, Marx truly believed that for this class Marxism to take hold, that a violent revolution was required, for the property class would not give up their property or their cultural status as the bourgeoisie without a fight. And so Marx wrote in clear terms that there is only one way, and that way is revolutionary terror. Vladimir Lenin, of course, agreed, for he too clearly stated that the suppression of the bourgeoisie state by the proletarian state is impossible without a violent revolution. And so we see Marx's revolutionary theory giving rise to the praxis of this Lenin-led Bolshevik Revolution taking place between the years 1917 and 1922, wherein it was estimated that some 28,000 executions per year were carried out, and all in the name of this Marxist revolution. And so we might say that while Marx developed this violent revolutionary theory, it was Lenin who executed it, both literally and figuratively. Then, of course, in later years, there were millions upon millions of other Russians, both shop owners and peasant farmers, who perished from the mass starvation that took place once their shops and farms were taken from them by force, along with the political purges and forced labor camps in Siberia and other places called gulags, where the dissidents and non-compliers were sent to wear out their lives and serve as a warning to others that dissent and non-compliance were options not to be tolerated. In any case, Lenin had discovered that Marx's theory, wherein the workers of the world would unite and throw off the bourgeoisie, never materialized. And so this is why Lenin organized and relied upon the Bolsheviks, a far-left Marxist faction that provided the muscle and revolutionary terror that both Marx and Lenin called for. And so this violent and deadly revolution of a far-left faction succeeded in one sense with its creation of the Soviet Union and the Communist Party, but failed miserably in another. For mass murder, mass starvation, and mass graves are no way to win over the hearts and minds of the people whom one has subjugated in terror. And so this failed and horrific political and economic experiment leads us to a new chapter in this story of Marxism. For there arose many Marxist theorists who came to be called New or Neo-Marxist, and hence Neo-Marxism. For they believed that what was needed was a far more gradual and peaceful revolution, imposed upon the people from within. In other words, what was needed was not a violent revolution, but a cultural revolution, which new approach gave rise to what today is called cultural Marxism. Now, to understand the origins of this cultural Marxism, we need to go back in time to an Italian philosopher and neo-Marxist named Antonio Gramsci, who was a critic of fascism and imprisoned in 1926 during Mussolini's reign. His voice was supposed to be silenced by this imprisonment, but he managed to write more than 30 notebooks and 3,000 pages of history and analysis during this imprisonment. Many of his writings can be found in his 3-volume prison notebooks. Gramsci broke away from Karl Marx's economic determinism and class Marxism in favor of what amounts to a cultural Marxism. For Gramsci believed that the ruling class, the bourgeoisie, used cultural institutions and cultural norms to maintain power and to keep the people in line through a modicum of peace and prosperity. An example of this would be the American dream, wherein most Americans are totally content with the peace, prosperity, religious values, and cultural norms of living in a Christian society and constitutional republic, wherein law and order prevail, industry flourishes, and freedom abounds. The future prospects of raising a family, owning one's own home with a dog in the front yard and 2 cars in the driveway, not only look possible in this land of opportunity, but probable, at least for every hard-working and ambitious American. And yet Gramsci believed that all this peace and prosperity was nothing more than the beguiling and oppressive trappings of capitalism and Western liberalism, and not at all the true freedom or liberation of the socialist men. Now, Gramsci believed that it was precisely these trappings of capitalism and Western liberalism which explained why the proletariat, the workers of the world, would never unite to overthrow the bourgeoisie. For the bourgeoisie had lulled the workers of the world to sleep by what we Latter-day Saints and the Book of Mormon would have referred to as a carnal security. In any event, Gramsci believed that the only way that a Marxist revolution could take place in the midst of such peace and prosperity would be from within and over time, and by what Gramsci's followers would later refer to as the long march through the institutions. Now you might be asking yourself, why did Gramsci and his fellow neo-Marxists still have faith in the ideology of Marxism, given all its horrific failures and the millions of deaths trying to implement it? The answer to this question will never be fully realized by any of us unless and until we come to realize that Marxist ideology is not merely of an economic and political nature, but rather is of a religious nature as well, in that this new socialist man and the Marxist utopia at the end of history was their version of being spiritually reborn and of achieving heaven, only for the Marxist it would be a heaven on earth. In other words, Marxism has all the features of a religion and of religious belief. And this promised Marxist utopia is the equivalent, in their minds, to our building Zion and the New Jerusalem to prepare the way for the second coming of Christ. Only in their minds, it is to prepare the way for the liberation of the new man, the socialist man, and in a Marxist utopia at the end of history. In short, cultural Marxism is a secular religion, and this explains the religious fervor of the woke cancel culture who have become activists and true believers of whatever woke cause they have attached and devoted themselves to, and in pursuit of what they sincerely believe to be the betterment of the world and humanity. To understand these woke activists and this Marxist religious fervor better, let's consider a little more of what Antonio Gramsci had to say about this long march through the institutions, which is clearly of a religious, political, and revolutionary nature. Gramsci writes, "Socialism is precisely the religion that must overwhelm Christianity. In the new order, socialism will triumph by first capturing the culture by infiltration of schools, universities, churches, and the media by transforming the consciousness of society." This passage is a gold mine for understanding cultural Marxism and woke activism. So let's take the time to lay out this five-fold socialist agenda. First and foremost is this understanding that socialism is a religion. Second, and equally revealing, is this mandate that socialism must overwhelm Christianity. Thirdly is the triumphant confidence and general target, that is, that socialism will triumph by capturing the culture. Fourth, we discover the modus operandi, that is, that the culture will be captured by infiltration. And then he specifies the intended infiltration of schools, universities, churches, and the media. And lastly, Gramsci states that this infiltration will be of a psychological and spiritual nature, that is, by transforming the consciousness of society. In other words, by gradually indoctrinating society with a Marxist and socialist consciousness rather than a liberal, capitalist, Christian, and individualist consciousness. Given this Marxist agenda, then, one can clearly see where the religious fervor of the woke cancel culture comes from. For to be a woke activist is not only a political, but a religious calling. And understanding that woke activism is both a political and religious calling is key to understanding what is going on in the world today. Now, before we leave Gramsci, let's make mention of this long march through the institutions. Gramsci names 5 institutions that he is specifically interested in capturing and transforming: religion, family, education, media, and the law. And of course, by religion, he means Christianity. By family, he means the nuclear family. By education, he means K through 12 and all the universities. By media, he means mainstream media, and had he lived in our day, social media. And finally, by law, he means the legal and government institutions themselves. Law firms, courts, police, prisons, state and local governments, as well as federal agencies and federal institutions, such as Congress, the presidency, and the Supreme Court. But this is not all, for had Gramsci lived in our day, he would have also included Hollywood, and by that I mean the entertainment industry. Next, professional sports, and by that I mean infiltrating sports in general with a new social consciousness and at all levels. And need I mention athletes taking a knee in protest against racism or transgender women participating in women's sports. Next, the high-tech industry, and by that I mean infiltrating and capturing high-tech companies such as Google, Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, and YouTube. Next, corporations, and by that I mean large corporations like Nike, Coca-Cola, Walmart's, McDonald's, and on, including Wall Street and all other financial institutions. Next, and perhaps scariest of all, the military. For nothing could be more disastrous than a woke military in a time of war. And yet, that is what we are currently dealing with in this push to incorporate critical race theory in our military academies. Now, this list is just the short list. We could add to it many more institutions, such as our entire healthcare industry, including the pharmaceuticals, such as Pfizer, Moderna, and Johnson & Johnson. And finally, think of your workplace, for has that not been infiltrated as well? You can answer that for yourself. Now, if one were to stop and ask oneself just exactly how far along this long march through the institutions has progressed, that is, as to just exactly how close this cultural revolution and Marxist agenda is from bringing the entire house of Western civilization down upon our heads, one might be terrified to know the answer. For we have reached the point where in this moral chaos and cultural madness of our day is threatening to abolish and demolish everything that we hold dear, including the American dream of raising our families in a peaceful, prosperous society and constitutional republic wherein law and order prevail, industry flourishes, and freedom abounds. With that having been said, I would like to end here and pick up this discussion in part 3 of this series. But before we go, I would also like to emphasize one last point for future reference. Now, the one last point I wanted to emphasize before we ended this episode is the importance of understanding that Marx was wrong when he said that there is only one way to win this class or cultural war between two opposing worldviews, and that way is revolutionary terror. For what Gramsci and the cultural Marxists have sadly proven is that there are actually two ways. The first way, of course, is what Marx and Lenin espoused, that is a cultural revolution from without, meaning violence in the streets and in the form of a far-left Bolsheviks revolution. And the second way is what Gramsci and the cultural Marxists have espoused, that is a cultural revolution from within, meaning indoctrination in the classroom, in our schools and universities, which is but one example of this long march through the institutions. It is clear from what is taking place in America and throughout the Western world in general that what we have to fear is this cultural revolution from within, rather than this violent revolution from without. Now, I must say that I do not believe that it is too late to take a stand against this Marxist infiltration of our Western institutions, but we do need to learn to say no to this moral chaos and cultural madness that is all around us, and to refuse to participate in our own demise as individuals, Latter-day Saints, and as Americans, by pushing back and reclaiming any and all lost territory, beginning with our children, our families, other church members, and close friends, if they have already become woke activists. This saying no, pushing back, and reclaiming any and all lost territory is what I had in mind when I spoke of the praxis of eternalism, which praxis I wish I had known more about in 2004 when I first came out with this course on the philosophy of eternalism. Nonetheless, it is now 2023, and as they say, it is better late than never. And by that I mean to speak up and speak out against this woke tyranny that has infiltrated all our institutions. Again, it's not too late to reclaim all these institutions back, but we must begin now by first gaining a better understanding of this cultural Marxism and woke activism, and then by pushing back and saying no to this long march through our institutions. Thank you for watching. Push the like button if you enjoyed this episode, and be sure to push the subscribe button. Until next time, consider the gravity of these perilous times, and remember that our children and grandchildren are depending on us to get this right and to leave them a world wherein they at least have a fighting chance.